So this phone has not really been opened before, so I'll take a little bit of time here. So we don't necessarily recommend you do it at home. As you can see, it's quite compact. That's part of the whole compact design of this phone. All right, cool, here we go. It's on a white background, so it might be a little bit harder to see here. So you can see right away that the inside is really, really quite tidy and really quite compact as well, right? There's pretty much nothing that you could add or take away from this phone. Right? It's actually quite tight in here. So I'm just going to go ahead here, and there's a couple of screws, so while the screw is going, I'll keep talking. One of the things I talked about earlier today, which you guys may recall, is that a smaller phone, especially nowadays, is actually harder to make than a bigger phone. What I mean is a 5-inch phone is actually much more difficult to make than a 5.5-inch phone. You can kind of see right away, because if this was a 5.5-inch phone, I would have room for all sorts of stuff. I would probably make this battery super big, super thick, especially when it's very compact, like this phone, right? You'll see a lot of other phones, maybe are very thick, right? And again, these are some of the normal specs that you don't necessarily see when you just look at a bare specs table and you're like, okay, this is 1080p screen, this is blah, blah, blah. So I often hear things like, you know, the Mi 4i is sort of like blah, blah, blah phone, but why is that other phone so much cheaper than the Mi 4i? Well, one thing we say very, very frequently is we sell our phones at cost, basically. So we also use the world's, we use the best components all the way down to these screws, which you can now see here. And so what that means is that, to be very blunt, if you saw a phone that looked similar but was cheaper, it must not be using the same quality components, because we're selling them at cost, unless they're selling them, you know, below cost, which is I think pretty unlikely today. So the price that you pay for this phone is basically the price of all the components. We're not taking like any sort of big margin or anything like that off the top of the phone. It's literally just, that is what this phone costs, right? That's the camera, that is the display, that's the battery, and that's all of the craftsmanship that goes into it. There's also a lot of things that don't necessarily get reflected in the specs, like the rigorous testing that you saw, like the overheating. A lot of phones don't undergo that testing because it's very expensive, and the honest truth is a lot of them wouldn't necessarily pass it, right? You know, a lot of phones nowadays are made in China. We see other phones off the fact that we can guarantee you that our testing process is the most rigorous in the industry. So you can really, really be assured that when you buy a Xiaomi product, it is top of the line. It's like been tested thoroughly. It hasn't been dropped in water, just to be clear. It's not actually a waterproof phone. It's just water resistant to light rain. It does soak under like light raindrops, like you saw in the video, for about 10 to 15 minutes. Sometimes it does soak quite dramatically. And at the end of the day, of course, it has to keep working. You see there's quite a bit of screws here, so it does take some time, so I have to sort of multitask. All right, so almost there. I think this is the last screw, but sometimes there are a lot of screws and they're a little bit hidden, so it's actually a little bit tricky sometimes. All right, let's try it. Let's try this out here. So we're gonna try to rip this out here. There we go. So you can see right away here that it's very, very tight in the middle here. This is the motherboard. There's a lot of different components here. There's the camera here. There's a lot of different screws here. You can see a lot of these very quick snap things as well. And these, of course, are also more expensive cables. You can just see that some of the care and detail that's been put into this. Here is the particular screw that attaches to the battery here. So I'm just going to take this tag here. Let's see if I can. Don't worry, trained professional. Just kidding. No, actually, I am a pro, dude. So you can see there's two different cables here, and of course there's a quick release cable here. We could have just, of course, soldered it on or done something else, but we felt like this is a little bit more elegant. These are, again, things that maybe most users would never see. I mean, the average user is not tearing apart their phone, but you guys are, hardcore phone enthusiasts. So we felt like you could really, really appreciate some of this stuff and really be able to write about it. So we just really want to make the case that the inside of the phone is just as pretty as the outside of the phone. And while I'm at it here, let's see if I can rip this bottom part off too. All right, here we go. Okay, so there's a couple things that I'll dive deeper into. Well, the first thing to maybe talk about in more detail is the motherboard, this piece here, or the PC board as we say. So there's a lot of things this PC board has to do. It obviously has to support the dual SIM 4G. It also has to pack all of the latest processors and the latest memory and so on and so forth. Rather than tear this out, just to save us a little bit of time, we've actually already torn apart a previous one, in addition to a bunch of other previous phones as well. So let's see here. All right. So it should be this one. Okay, so here's the motherboard here. Sort of all ripped out in its glory. And you'll see right away if you compare this to something else like, let's see if I can find another one here. Well, let's take something like the Mi Note, for example. You see that it's actually a lot more dense than the Mi Note, right? Despite the fact that we're packing more functionality into it. It's also a double-sided board, which of course makes it more dense. Why do we make this so dense? Well, one of the key reasons is that we need to pack more room for the battery. Right? And particularly we want a big square area for the battery, which you see right here, because obviously the bigger the space you have, the bigger the capacity can be. And battery technology is not too simple, right? Like, we wanted to make this battery as thin as possible, because you can see here that the thicker the battery is, it basically almost determines the entire size of this phone, or thickness of this phone. The other thing that really determines the thickness is the display, which we have right here. So this is a fully laminated OGS one glass solution display. So you can see one of the special things about this display, we mentioned earlier that a typical non-OGS display has at least 4 different layers. Right? At the very top you have this protective glass, at the bottom you have these different touch panels, X and Y, then you have an air gap, and then you have the LCD at the bottom. And you can see all of that's right here. So thin, right? And one of the things we say very often is that this is pretty much as thick as a credit card, maybe even thinner. Let me see how thick my credit card is nowadays, right? Okay, well, I happen to have a bit of a thicker credit card here, right? But you can see it's basically a credit card here. Okay, you guys, don't take a picture of my credit card now. Just kidding, it's hiding.
Sorry, just hold up for a bit.
Yeah. So you can see this is actually a very, very thin display. Basically a credit card thickness. And it's actually pretty amazing, you know, if you could actually connect this display right now, you would actually just be able to display things. Everything you need. The touch panel, the protective glass, the Corning OGS glass, custom-made glass is all in this display for us. And as you can see, it's very, very, very black, is the camera. So how do we make the camera flush and flat? Well, there's a patented technology which I alluded to earlier, which we also used in the Mi Note, which makes the phone very, very flat. I did have a Mi Note, but I felt like maybe we should focus on the X9. We should focus on this phone first, and then we can look at the Mi Note later. But it's the same technology. You know what? I'll take it out, just so you can see how it's flat. The reason why it's so flat, you kind of see it right here. We basically have these 2 little handles on the side of the phone, on the side of the camera here. And basically what that lets us do is it lets us sort of hang the camera there, because most cameras need a protective covering on the front and the back of the camera, which of course adds to the thickness of the phone. And that's how we have this patented technology. We've patented this ourselves, something that no one else has really done at this level. And that's the same technology we use for Mi Note, and is also what we use for Mi 4i to make this camera very flat. So that of course also decreases the thickness, because we don't need so much space on the bottom and the top. Let's talk a little bit about both of these. So you see there's actually 2 PCB boards. There's one at the top and one at the bottom. The reason we have one at the bottom is for a couple reasons. The first one is that when you plug in your phone, then it gets plugged in at the bottom. You actually see some designs nowadays from some phones that claim to be flagship phones, where they actually put this at the very top. So sometimes you're plugging in from the top, which of course seems really weird if you're holding a device like this, which is actually a use case. But of course it's more expensive to put it at the bottom. The other reason we put this at the bottom is we also have speakers, which you can see at the bottom. And that's because when you're holding the phone like this, it's more natural for the speakers to be at the bottom than at the top, so it kind of bounces off your hand. We also, you can see here, have a little protective thing here that props the phone up slightly on it, so the speakers can still sound. Okay, so that's the bottom here. So let me just sort of display these a little bit more naturally. So you can kind of see this in its glory here. So you can see there's quite a few screws here. And we'll sort of put this maybe right here.
Your card.
I'll take my card away, yes. Thank you for not taking a picture.
Let's move this here for a bit.
This is the camera. There's another one here, but this is obviously a separate PCB board here. Let's just sort of put it right here. A photo of this won't look that good. We're just trying to show you that when you go under sun, if I shine this light in your eye, then you'll get the idea too. Your pupils will shrink because you just can't take in that much light. And so this will appear even darker. And so we have to change it on a pixel by pixel basis so that it still looks good for you, right? So this is a very, very special technology. We're launching it right now. Just turn it on all the time. Well, this is turned on all the time. We're showing you actually a video when you're just doing a note here. So for example, the default keyboard that we have installed is SwiftKey, which has a dark background, as you can see here. And even this actually shows very, very dramatically.